So our next speaker is Adrian Meintjes from SRK, and he'll be speaking about tailing storage facility design and failure modes, considering small strain measurements and performance monitoring. Thank you, Adrian.
Good morning, all. I'm going to talk at a slightly lower level than Lindsay. I was asked to give a talk to give a perspective to this group on what is a tailing storage facility, and so I'm not going to go too deeply into many of the topics, but can always ask questions. So. I'm just going to give a high-level overview, talk about some design basics, talk about the GISTM, talk a little bit about credible failure modes. Then I'm going to talk about stress-strain behavior, which I think will be interesting for this grouping. Then a little bit about performance monitoring, where we are now, and then some of the things where I think this group may be able to contribute to in the future. So if you consider mining, then you excavate there, and whether it's underground or surface mining, which is here depicted, it gets taken to the process plant where the mine rock is ground fine, and then the desired minerals are extracted, and then the tailings is stored in some form of facility. So our business is depicted on this slide, where you can see how the tailings flows out of the pipe in a very slurry-like manner, and it's this that then hardens or densifies with time to allow these structures to operate. But I wanted to show you that we're dealing with something that has got a solids concentration initially of at least 50%. So I don't know where my click. Which way must I point the pointer? Oh, there. Okay. I must point it there to the other screen. Okay. So I just wanted to show you on an existing tailings facility, recent tailings has been deposited there. It runs towards the pool, which is back here. And you can see the color differences around the edge. This is now desiccating and drying out. This is very recent stuff. Very different solids concentrations, but you can see, we have to dry the material out somewhat in order to have stability. And tailings dam technology can be summarized on this slide if you consider natural processes. So where the flow velocity is fastest, erosion takes place. And if you deposit too much tailings in too small an area, you erode the beach. And where the flow is slow, there's particle deposition, and then there's segregation with bigger and heavier particles setting out first and smaller particles flowing further. And if we were to interrogate what Lindsay had said, then in the sedimentary rocks at 3 kilometers or 4 kilometers, the same sort of principles would apply, and that makes life difficult. I don't know, I'm doing something wrong. Oh, there. I must press harder. So I just want to briefly say something about tailings dams. Mining has been around almost for as long as there's been human beings. There's been a progression. Bit of a heartache in the middle paragraph is to say the initial mining just dumped the tailings into the rivers and stuff like that. You can see that at Vredefort if you were to go there, and you can see it in many other places. And then since about 1900, the scale of mining increased so much that dumping it just in the veld was no longer an option, and facilities had to be built. And also as a result of the tailings being grinded finer and finer. And typically there are three types of tailings dams. You get downstream ones where there's basically an earth or a rockfill embankment and the tailings get stored there. You can have a center line where the tailings is sort of the tailings dam is built up more in a vertical one, and then the upstream tailings dams where you need to make sure that the tailings dries out sufficiently. And just a high-level overview of what is included in the tailings dam. There's normally some form of starter wall. There's always some form of drains. And the ideal is to have the phreatic surface or the water table at some distance from the outside. Then there's a pool. I've shown a decant tower, tailings deposition that takes place. Yeah, and just very importantly, construction of the outer shell relies on the segregation of the particle sizes. And I haven't shown any layering on the cross section, but believe me, the layers vary between 5 millimeters and up to about 150 millimeters. So a tailings dam is a highly structured facility. And I just wanted to show the natural process. It goes from coarser to finer as you go inwards. So I just briefly want to talk about the GISTM. One of the issues has been that tailings engineering wasn't completely integrated. And I had a long conversation with Dick this morning about value of systems. And GISTM set its mind on the fact that unless you integrate tailings engineering into all aspects, you can't evaluate the impact of value and risk. So if I can just work through this, the first one is the affected communities. Number two is your knowledge database. Number three is design, construction, and operations. Number four is management and governance. Number five is emergency response and long-term recovery. And number six is public disclosure and access to information. So the GISTM comprises 6 topics, 15 principles, and 77 requirements, of which the engineering portion of it is about 40. So approximately 50%, or just more than 50%, of the GISTM is related to engineering. So how to manage the challenges? You need to have a good design, you need to have high quality construction, high quality tailings deposition, sufficient instrumentation, which might interest some of you, good environmental and human resource management, good quality and regular performance monitoring, good records and oversights. The other thing which is special about tailings dams is that a tailings dam can operate for many decades. In some projects, it can be a 5-year project, but some of them can be 80 years or 100 years or so. So the people management and the systems that you put in place to manage this is quite important. And therefore, tailings dams, due to the inherent nature of how they are operated, are one of the most dynamic structural developments in civil engineering and requires due and detailed attention. And if you get it wrong, then you kill people. And I didn't prepare a slide on it, but the uranium website lists all the tailings dam failures since 1960. And since 1960, in terms of their database, there's been 180 tailings dam failures, which has killed, I don't know, thousands of people. So it's a very serious business that I'm talking about today, Rory. So just something about credible failure modes that need to be managed. So the first one is we've got to make sure that we have a water table that sits there and not a water table that sits there, because that implicitly means the internal drainage system is not working well enough. And then the tailings deposition also needs to occur in a manner so that there's a slope from the outside to the inside. Because if it was dipping this way, you'd get overtopping. So just another summary. If we have a big enough earthquake and the design and operations weren't good enough, it will fail the tailings dam. You can have a failure of the outlet system if that's not properly designed and constructed. If this material liquefies, it can fail the wall as well. And then something that Lindsay was talking about, if your foundation is not strong enough, then that can also fail the tailings dam. And I'm not going to go into all the details of what sort of failures can occur with regard to that. This is just a high-level overview for now. So this is a nice-looking tailings dam. It's a bit more than 50 years old. And what is nice is look at that small pool there. And the regular shape is also pleasing. So getting into some more details. And this is to give perspective to the geophysics people that are here. I've shown one tailings triaxial test results to show the implications of strain level. Now, the peak value of strength occurs between 0.5 and 3% strain. In this particular test, we've not yet reached steady state conditions, which will probably only be reached at about 30%. But before that time, something would have gone wrong. So on this picture, I'm showing that if you were to take this stress strain curve and you were to evaluate the secant shear stiffness, you can see that the initial portion is between 90 megapascals and about 25 megapascals. And then post-peak is all these small numbers between, I don't know, 25 down to almost zero. What is important to note is any form of geophysics in its current format only measures small strain stiffness, which can be between 2 and 5 times larger than the measured required conventional triaxial compression test. So we've got to find a gap, a way to close this gap, because having numbers, for example, sitting there, doesn't directly help us to understand what is happening here. So that is really quite a thought. And that's why I'm here today, Rory. So just to give you an idea of stability in a very summarized manner, if you consider the peak to be there, and now I've changed the scale here, you can see that in this particular case, it sits at about 1%, and it could be 3%. But typically, if we aim for a factor of safety of 1.5, then you cannot exceed the stresses at about 2/3 of the peak, because the inverse of 2/3 is 1.5. And therefore, this is the range of stiffness that we typically should be thinking about. What's going to happen in this sort of range? Doesn't mean to say that small strain stiffness is not important. The numerical models need to use that to evaluate the behavior far away from where the failure could develop. But I'm just giving you an overview of, at the place of failure, this is what you need to think about. So just some comments on performance monitoring. This is very high level stuff. Other people are going to talk about more detail in this regard. But there are two sort of current topics for performance monitoring. It's the development of the knowledge base. So you do site investigation, and you do evaluation of the tailings properties. And this will include various forms of geophysical testing to allow interpolation of the localized test results. And it's really important, you know, you can't go and drill 1,000 boreholes for a tailings dam, which maybe spans over 300 hectares, but you could maybe drill 20 and then use geophysics to interpolate. And then a subject which I'm only going to mention, but it's really important, is to monitor the performance of the design structure. Does it meet the design intent? So the data that we normally collect is site inspections, weather stations, drain flow readings, phreatic surface determination. We can use standpipe piezometers. We can use some geophysical techniques to evaluate what it is. We can use vibrating wire piezometers. We measure the pool depth, the freeboard. We use INSAR. We use GeoRadar, site-specific survey, drone survey. Geometry is always a thing that needs to be managed or understood. So if the geometry changes, you need to know why. And then we measure internally with shape arrays, can use fiber optic cables. There's dust monitoring, surface and groundwater flow monitoring. So it also allows the updating of the knowledge base during the active life cycle. So I'm going to start at the bottom. I was involved with with a water dam, which over a period of 1 week, it was 12 meters high, failed, and the backscarp was more than 3 meters tall. So a very tall person would stand about there. And down the slopes, there were these cracks. And just before we started doing the back analysis investigation, the vegetation was cut. And now to twist your interest, when we did initial test pitting, just to the right here, we just dug a little test pit with an excavator. As we dug it, we could hear the noise of the remobilization of the failure, and we could feel the vibration of the structures. So I wanted to leave this thought with you that we need performance monitoring, and then probably the $1 trillion question on this slide is, how will geophysics and other technologies help us to give us advance warning of when things will go wrong? And that's my story.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really interesting talk. This is a real opportunity to ask questions to a real expert in the field. So I'm hoping the geophysicists have 1 or 2 questions for Adrian today. Is there any questions from the group?
Thanks. Thanks, Adrian. A lovely overview. There have been two, as far as I know, major disasters of tailing storage facilities in South Africa. Mariespruit in 1994, and of course, recently in 22 at Jagersfontein.
And in 1974 was Bafokeng.
Okay.
Which killed 18 people.
Okay, I didn't know about that one. But what were the findings of those inquiries into it? What went wrong? What do we need to do differently to stop events like that recurring?
I can't talk about Jagersfontein because there's still a curfew on knowledge sharing. So please don't ask me a question. And for the purpose of this meeting, I know nothing. Mariespruit didn't deal with freeboard. So they had an overtopping event, which was on one of the slides I showed you that freeboard is important. About 70% of all tailings dam failures are related not to have enough freeboard, which means the level between where the water normally is and where the top of the wall is on a worldwide basis. So that also accounts for what happened at Bafokeng. There wasn't enough freeboard. And one can dig into the detail. The material was very soft. At Bafokeng, there was actually a number of flaws in the drying out of the tailings at Mariespruit, which also so when it overtopped, it completely eroded away material that should have stood up. We had an overtopping event at Cook Tailings Dam a couple of years ago, but that tailings dam was well constructed. It eroded a gully in which you could park trucks. I'm talking about mining trucks now, but it didn't cause a catastrophe. But yeah, so is that a good enough answer, right? Good.
That was also my question. When the tailings are sent to the storage, are they cemented or are they just sent in their natural? Yeah.
So it's not cemented, and the reason for that is, in order to get a weak cemented material, you need approximately a minimum of 2% cement per ton. So you can imagine what the cost of that would be. So the way that people normally do it is to make sure that the wall is good enough, that all of the good things that are said about you've got to take care of this and take care of that. Thin lift tailings deposition is a seriously important thing, because we live in a country where the evaporation potential is about 2.5 to 3.5 meters a year, and the rainfall typically is, like in Joburg, is a maximum of say 550. So really, if you place the material in thin layers and you have a facility that allows that to happen, then many of the problems go away. Yeah, but cement, people have thought about it, but the pockets aren't normally deep enough for that.
Just a quick one, Adrian. You mentioned 180 failures, I think it was. What is that expressed as a percentage, roughly? Is it about 1%, 2% of tailings dams, all in all?
So there's about 5,000 tailings dams in the world. So the failure rate rounded off to 200. You can calculate what that is, but it's an unacceptably high number. It is a disgrace, if I'm allowed to say it like that. Bruce, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, maybe just more of a comment. If in the tailings world deposition happened as it was designed. In other words, we deposited very thin layers and consistently deposited very thin layers and allowed it to dry out and all those types of things, then pretty much all of the risk is abated in terms of tailings dam stability. But certainly in South Africa, deposition doesn't happen like that. So deposition practices are very poorly managed, and as engineers, we don't have enough money or clout to go and try and look at the zoning in tailings dams where deposition has been done badly. So in the context of this gathering, if we could get a better idea of what the zonation in tailings dams looks like, the engineers would perhaps be able to do something more about that high failure rate through geophysics, the zonation, that is.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one comment. It's not on this slide, but there's something called high quality tailings deposition that is an objective. And on one of the slides before this, I spoke about thin lift deposition so that it can gain strength and so on. We've just gone through a project recently where in 3 months, 1.5 meters of tailings was placed on a tailings dam. So that doesn't resemble thin lift deposition. So these things are real.
I wanted to ask, since it seems like tailing deposition is such a big thing, especially for the mining industry, there obviously has to be a place where they deposit these tailings. I just wanted to know if the mining industry has looked into reusing tailings for something, say, I don't know what exactly, but yeah, basically.
Your question is extremely valid. I can give you a short and a long answer. I'll give you the short answer. The big problem is we're talking about millions of tons of material. And then you've got to think about what are you going to do, for example, make bricks for houses, whatever. So you've got to make sure that the tailings doesn't contain any adverse chemicals. And then secondly, the big killer normally is the cost of transportation. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't keep on trying, because if you improve pumping technologies, maybe you can pump the stuff closer to where the application could be, and you could go and make bricks as an example there or whatever. So yes, it needs to be thought of, and that's why that circular diagram is so important, because if you really think about all the components of the world around the tailings dam, the cost benefit might be there to actually go and do that.
Just perhaps make a comment on that. There's a lot of work now being done to look at these old tailings dams to see if they've got critical raw materials and things like that, things that were waste 100 years ago now of value. But just who's in South Africa? We've got many, mines that have shut down and are abandoned. Who is responsible for ensuring that the monitoring continues? And in your opinion, what is the risk that these old mine dumps that we see all over the country, what do they pose to us?
I can only give you a qualified answer. It becomes the responsibility of the state. And in the case of asbestos specifically, a couple of years ago, there was a project to look at all the asbestos mine dumps because they couldn't live with the legacy of asbestos poisoning going into the future. Because the thing that I didn't say, but it's another conversation point, if you don't maintain the facility properly, in Zambia, I've seen erosion gullies that are 30 meters deep. And you can park buses in them and stuff like that. But that's Zambia. I mean, it rains a little bit more than normally here, but yeah. I'm done.
Am I allowed to ask a question? Because nobody asked Lindsay a question earlier, and I know you're all still full from tea and cakes before this. Lindsay, the results you've got, how much of a willingness has there been from the mine to take in that information and change anything, or it's not at that level yet?
So far I've just done really an academic bit of work, and there's been no engagement with the mine at all.
We've had complete cooperation and support from the mines, and you know that at Moab Khotsong they have now got a mine deepening project. There's a life of mine is another 30 years there, so it's one of our big resources. And they know they're sitting on top of a fault that's capable of a magnitude 5.5 earthquake, so they're very interested in what we are doing. Yes, you know, and so we've had and continue to have full support from Harmony.